So the other day, I went to Kroger. That's quite a trip these days. I don't know if you've made that trip yourself or to one of the other grocery stores in town over the last week since we gathered last for worship, but it's kind of crazy in there, isn't it? Lots of people buying lots of things, filling up carts, empty shelves. It's panic buying, we call it. And it's having an effect such that they're even changing store hours now. And so if you don't already know, Kroger's not going to be 24 hours. Walmart's not going to be 24 hours. They're both closing around midnight and opening up around 6 a.m. so that they can restock their shelves and sanitize their stores in between the rush to get everything and anything that people can get to prepare for whatever lies ahead during this pandemic. Checkout lines are long, the new hours, hand sanitizer's been gone for a week and a half, and there is no toilet paper anywhere. I was talking to the manager because the reason that I went to the store was not so much to stock up on things. I did need a gallon of milk, and I was lucky. I found like 2 left in there, and it was nice to have a gallon of milk to take home, but we would have survived whether we found one or not. What I had gone there for was to check on food for Blessings in a Backpack and to see if we were going to have any issues to pack today for later for Blessings in a Backpack so we can get some kiddos some food this week while they're home. And the manager assured me, no problem, got it, we'll be fine during this whole thing, and if you need more, let me know, we'll get it for you. So that was great to know from our grocery partner, and they're just exceptional folks that have worked with us for the last 6 years to make sure that we feed all these kids. But one of the things that he talked about was the bottled water stock. And I thought it's kind of interesting. I'm not fully understanding the need to stock up on water, but that's okay. He started out the day with 8 pallets of water. It's a picture like that one on the left. 8 pallets, that's, I don't know how many bottles, but he gave me a number, it was huge. The number of cases of water, it was gone. It was gone. This was like supper time or time like that. It was gone. And he said, I'll have more at midnight. When the truck gets here tonight and we get it back on the shelf, I'll have more at midnight. But he says every day it's just gone. Now, I don't know if people are just extra thirsty when they're anxious, if that's what's going on, or what other kinds of things. I know in disaster preparedness things, they say you should have some water available, all those kinds of things, but it's really been a panic situation of people just really going all out and buying all this water and things, and I'm wondering if they're going to have enough for the next couple years in their bedrooms or wherever they are stocking it. Hopefully, none of us in this room are like the 2 gentlemen that I read about who wanted to take advantage of this panic and amassed 17,700 containers of hand sanitizers, the little pumps, and then began to try to sell those on eBay and Amazon. They had an account on Amazon because people could sell there, and they were trying to sell those on Amazon for $50 plus per bottle. And they got away with it for a couple days until Amazon and eBay said, this is price gouging, this is wrong, you can't do it. Now they're stuck with 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer, and we can't get any anywhere because they have it all in there. They actually rented a U-Haul truck and drove from Dollar General to Dollar General to Dollar General, and anymore that only means a few blocks, but they drove from Dollar General to Dollar General to Dollar Tree stores. That's where they bought it all. So everything they bought was $1 per bottle. And they plan to sell it for $50 each and make their millions and go on, but that was a thwarted plan. So, panic buying, taking advantage of others, the kind of things that happen when we have anxiety and fear in our midst. Things really change, don't they? We're kind of in what I call uncharted times. Most of us weren't alive in the last pandemic of, 1918 or 1919, that we had an influenza pandemic. And so only Ida May gets to say she might have been alive during that pandemic. But we haven't, so we haven't experienced this. It's uncharted territories. None of our systems that we have that we rely on have dealt with this before. And it is this for everyone. And everyone's trying to figure out what the next thing is, what the best steps are. Churches are closed. About 50% of our disciples' churches in the area are closed right now. You got to laugh a little bit during this time, right? So lots of things, lots of schedules have changed, right? There's lots of cancellations, all of our arts events, all of our festivals and fundraisers and schools, and it just seems like everything is out of place. Even our communion service and our offering is different. Worship seems a little out of place, if you will. Well, that's true of the story that we just heard and watched on the screen from John's Gospel this morning. Everything's a little out of place, or maybe even a lot out of place. Two persons from two distinct and segregated peoples gathering at the same well, forbidden by cultural standards to even be there. A Jew and a Samaritan with a long history of animosity and reproach for one another, standing between them and looking over their shoulders. Here they are at this well together. A man and a woman speaking to each other in deep theological and spiritual ways in a community where that was reserved for men only and between two learned men only. A woman who leaves her water jar or bucket at the well and enters into the mission and ministry of Jesus as one of his closest followers, as a disciple, as one of his first ministers of the gospel, who goes and tells the men and everybody else, "Come and see the one who told me everything I've ever done or been. Come and see. Could he be the Messiah?" The Samaritans and the Jews had separated themselves. Sound familiar? Social distancing is nothing new. Social distancing was something that has happened all through human existence. Sometimes it's out of necessity and safety, and sometimes it's done because of hate. It's done because of animosity. It's done for control and power. Social distancing from one another many centuries before the followers of Jesus' life and ministry shared this story. That's why it looks over their shoulders when they stand at that well. That distancing had been a long divide. The divide was so deep and so wide. The Samaritans and Jews were forbidden from drinking from the same water. From the same water. Samaritans and Jews were forbidden from using the same restrooms. I know, they didn't have restrooms back then, but I think you know where I'm going with this. And from sitting at the same lunch counters in public places. According to scholars who have studied these stories in ancient Israel, this existed as a tradition for some time. The Samaritans, they say, were considered ritually impure and would impart that impurity on any eating or drinking vessels they touched. I couldn't make this up if I wanted to. This is the story appointed for you and for me in the lectionary today. That Jews and Samaritans couldn't touch a common cup. In my reading on social media this week from all of my colleagues across the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, many of our communions of faith, when they have communion, they use a common cup. They do what we call intinction. So they tear off a piece of bread, and like we do maybe at Christmas time, and they dunk it in a cup and they take it together, and everybody was trying to figure out, how are we going to do communion this Sunday, because we can't do that. We can't touch that common cup. And we're right. It's a good precaution. And so ideas were being generated and thrown out there, and I will tell you the idea for how we're doing communion today came right from those conversations and discussions. And here we are with this story of a Jew and a Samaritan who are forbidden to touch the same drinking vessel because it might make the Jew impure by the Samaritan's impurity. That divide, though, went even further than being in close proximity or social distancing, because that divide had power with it as well. It was a power that degraded the Samaritans, and especially the women, by labeling them as menstruants from the cradle, or simply unclean from birth. Unclean from birth. The division was far beyond the wrongful treatment of young girls by young boys in a male-dominated culture, because this division carried with it immeasurable power. Immeasurable power. You see, this segregation that was fueled by the religious ideologies of a few powerful elite leaders of the Jerusalem temple, who by virtue of their own decrees were given the power to decide who was within the everlasting covenant with God and who was not in the everlasting covenant of God. The Samaritans had a reputation. They had a reputation for straying from their relationship with God, from their ancestors. A reputation of those who had allowed their religious rituals, practices of foreign gods and foreign peoples to have influence upon their personal rituals and their lives. So it had some history. Over and over again, Samaria had been threatened by neighboring kingdoms, and many, many times they had accepted and assimilated some of what those threatening empires and kingdoms had as their ways of life. They broke their bond, their fidelity with God. Like the symbolism in this story, though, by John, of an unfaithful spouse. Go and tell your husband, well, I don't really have a husband. No, you don't. You've been married 5 times, and the man you're living with is not even your husband. Remember in the story? That story within a story, that image within a whole image of a broken or unfaithful covenant in a relationship, is to point to Samaria herself, a people who's already broken covenant many different times. It may not even be about that woman, but it's an image, a symbol for us to think about that covenant has been broken over and over and over and over again. So by that image, wouldn't it be safe to say that Jesus had all right to condemn her as a Samaritan, as his people had been doing for years? To say, look, you've broken it so many times, there's no hope for you. But instead, Jesus says, give me something to drink. And she's astonished. Jesus says, I would give you life-giving water. And she's astounded and astonished. When his disciples return and find him speaking to a woman, they're astonished. We can only imagine the conversation that's going on there. What in the world, Jesus, do you think you're doing? Why are you talking to her? Right? But Jesus has. And Jesus has offered her the gift of life-giving water, or eternal life, or the good news that God has accepted her. Even her. Even the Samaritans in Jesus. I am the one coming to give you that water. I am the one coming to let you know that you are accepted, you are adopted, you are affirmed by God. And no matter what those elites tell you from the temple, that God's love is for you. God's grace is for you. just as it is for everyone else. Just as it is for everyone else. The woman leaves her bucket behind, not unlike other disciples who left their nets and their boats behind. And she runs to tell everybody else the good news. And John's gospel says to us that many believed because of her testimony. Many came to faith in Jesus because of what she shared. She's another one of those first preachers of the gospel, in the Gospels. And she's a woman. Never forget that. So we have this story today. In the midst of a world that seems so out of place. Everything in that story was out of place. And Jesus gave it place. In the love and grace of God. In the gift of everlasting life. In His name. So we come to this moment in our journey. Along this journey. We have to ask ourselves, who are the Samaritans right now in our midst? Who are the ones we have labeled as unclean or unworthy from birth of God's salvation by our own judgments and our own stereotypical assumptions? And in the midst of this pandemic, who are we easily blaming and shaming? Who are we demonizing and dehumanizing? Who are we allowing our fear to skew our love for neighbor? Every neighbor, even our enemies, as Jesus commands us to do. We have to ask ourselves, who will we share the well of God's endless supply of life-giving water, not just 8 pallets in a store, but real life-giving love and grace and compassion and acceptance and peace? Who are we going to share that with? Are we going to share it with our enemies? Are we going to share it with undocumented residents? Are we going to share it with the homeless poor? Are we going to share it with those whose lives are disrupted by the economic and social consequences of social distancing? Heard about some athletes this week as the sports world went blank, who have reached out and tried to help vendors who work in their arenas because they know that their economic life has been shattered, changed. Everything's out of place. How can we redeem and reconcile all of that in this time? Well, first, I urge you, do what we suggest about social distancing. Be careful. Be thoughtful. Follow those good suggestions and advice. Try not to get yourself sick or anybody else sick. And second, if you have the opportunity in a safe way to reach out to somebody, maybe it's a neighbor you know has kids home from school that they weren't expecting. Maybe it's an older person that's got to self-quarantine to protect themselves. Maybe it's one of the residents of one of our care facilities that needs a phone call. They can still answer the phone. Or needs a card. Or needs a prayer. Maybe it's a loved one who's just so full of anxiety, who needs a calming presence for a moment. How is it that you can bring that cup of life-giving water? How is it that we can bring that cup of compassion and care and peace? Well, the first part of that is to have it in our lives ourselves. To have it in our lives ourselves. And by attending today, I think you're a testament to that peace and that grace in your life. So I encourage you to share it responsibly, but just as that woman did in that story. Drop that bucket, run and go tell. Come and hear about God's peace and God's grace for you and even for me. In just a few minutes, we will remember the Lord and Savior at this table of communion, which has been set for everyone. We will remember and celebrate the amazing gift of grace and forgiveness, acceptance and salvation symbolized in the bread and the cup as we partake of them this day. We're all going to be invited to the well of new life, to be living in the fullness of God's love for you. So come and be filled with God's abundant love and grace. And may God's peace be with you. For Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid." Amen.